Begin the recording. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Senator Vandeweghe. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and welcome to 2021. Here's to hoping that this year is going to be better than the last. The bar's set low, so we hope that will be a positive event. So. Really appreciate you all joining us, and we're honored to have our district senator join us this morning to talk about a myriad of issues, but to also discuss what he sees as priorities and for the legislative session and in this upcoming year. So from there, Senator Vandeweghe, I will let you take it. And then we will have questions afterwards, and you can post them in the chat, or if you don't have the capacity to do that, I will open the floor to questions for those of you that can't put your name in the chat, and I'll go ahead and have you ask the question directly. So with that, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Great, Colleen. Thank you. And thanks for the invitation to do this. I appreciate it. And I will go over a few things. And then, like Colleen said, look forward to taking your questions. I think you've already talked with both Mike and Steve, so hopefully I won't repeat too many things. But, you know, session's constantly developing and things change every day. Just for a refresher, we're starting Monday, session January 11th. And this is a longer session. It's a 105-day session. The state legislative session every year, and every other year in odd number years right after an election, we do a budget, a biennial 2-year budget. So we're doing that this year, and the budget will start July 1st of 2021 and run till June 30th of 2023. So we'll be finishing up a budget, 2-year budget and starting a new one, so that's why we go a little longer. It will be certainly a different type of legislative session this year, in that a lot of it will be done virtually and remote. And I know a lot of you, I recognize so many faces and names, come down and see us during the legislative session, or we meet with you, or what have you, and a lot of that's not possible this year. We have to do everything virtually, like we're doing this meeting. The House, is my understanding, is going to be completely virtual. They'll just have a couple people on the House floor. Senate, since we have fewer members, is different than that. There's 49 senators from the 49 legislative districts, and there's 98 House members from the 49 legislative districts. So we're half the size, and we will be doing more of a hybrid. So the Senate will have probably about 15 people when we're on the floor, rotating through members depending on what bills are being passed. But all of our committee hearings will be completely virtual, and that will be a significant change, as will all of the meetings with constituents, as far as I can tell. But I don't want that to, that shouldn't create a roadblock in hearing from you, and I hope it doesn't. So if there's questions that arise from this, or as we're going through the legislative session, feel free to contact us to set up some virtual meetings, or if there's things that are important to you, or stuff you have issues with or oppose, always feel free to contact us. That's incredibly important to us, to me especially. So just a couple of issues I'll just go over in really no certain order, no priority order, that I think we're gonna tackle. Either myself is heading it up, or it's just gonna be a big issue this session. Rural broadband is certainly one. I'm sure Steve Theringer mentioned this. This pandemic has taught us anything. It's taught us that we need good internet access everywhere in the state, including rural areas. And I think we'll continue to make inroads on creating good broadband across the state. That's important. And I think that with just the change, people have realized that they're more capable of working from home or running for their business from home. So I think not only is rural broadband important, but a lot of people have always wanted to live on the Olympic Peninsula. It's a beautiful place to live. And I believe that people are going to start moving out here if they can have rural broadband, since they've realized or come to the understanding that they can do a lot of their business and a lot of what they need to do from home. So not only is rural broadband important, but I think it also means a lot of more people are going to consider moving out to Olympic Peninsula. Police reform is something that's been talked about a lot. I've chatted with the advocates, some on the police reform, and I personally don't see a lot of support of what they're proposing, but I think it's something that is going to be on a lot of people's mind and going to take up some time and energy this legislative session. Capital gains tax is something that's been talked about a lot as well. I don't know where I'm going to be at on it personally. It's a tax that I kind of hesitate to support, but it does make some sense as far as making our tax system more equitable. I don't know if we had proposed something like that. I think a lot of the supporters of it are going to want to spend the money on new programs. Childcare is something that's been talked about a lot. Childcare is something that desperately needed, and having the state help fund that there's potential there to make it a good program. But it would be, I think, the most equitable we could make it is if we lowered use that money to lower other taxes. But we'll see how that plays out. Unemployment insurance is something that this group is asked about, and I think it's on a lot of the minds of business owners. During the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, we had, I think, a balance of $4.8 billion in our unemployment insurance account, the second strongest in the nation. Much of that has been spent. That now needs to be replenished, and business owners are worried that they're going to be hit with some higher taxes. There will be legislation. I think the governor's even he's not sponsoring it, but he is advocating for some legislation that I know a lot of legislators are excited about, which would essentially freeze that and smooth it out over a longer period of time. It should be pretty popular. I'm just reading my notes on it here. In the Senate, it's going to be sponsored by Karen Kaiser, and actually I think she's going to have the only bill, and I'll touch on that in a second. So I think it'll go through pretty rapidly. We're going to make it on our early action list, and the House is primed to take it up as well. And just to delve into that a little bit, normally we introduce a lot of legislation and a lot of bills. Legislative leaders are trying to keep that tamped down as much as they can. I know the House has somewhat of a rule on how many bills they can introduce and about companion bills. Companion is where same legislation is introduced both in the House and Senate. The House has some rules about that. The Senate essentially has no rules, although they're trying to prioritize what legislation we're going to do. So that the unemployment insurance smoothing kind of stopgap bill is something that that'll just go through the Senate and then into the House. There won't be a House version. Two tax bills that Mike and I are going to work on are, and they're tax relief bills. Mike's heading up a charter vessel bill, which we've worked with the Port of Port Angeles. I see Karen's on the phone. And that would essentially give a tax break for a tax that's never been collected, so that charter vessels can stay here longer and get more work done in our ports, and the people that have large yachts can spend more money in Port Angeles and Port Townsend while they're here. He's going to head up that one, and then I'm heading up a salmon restoration. Again, a tax that's never been collected. Our Department of Revenue is saying that salmon restoration projects need to pay quite a bit of sales tax that they've never paid before, and we're going to try to shut that down before it's ever collected. If that went through, it would essentially be a 10% cut to our salmon restoration projects that have shown some benefit here on the Olympic Peninsula, getting salmon back, and have put some people to work, certainly. And then last I'll touch on is the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And before I mention that, I should tell you my committee assignments. I'm chair of the Agriculture and Natural Resource, Water and Parks Committee, and I also sit on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the fiscal committee in the Senate, and the Healthcare Committee. Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has made some unpopular and I believe unwise moves that have affected our district. And Mike is the new chair of the Mirrored Committee in the House. So we'll work together to attempt to bring some light to Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, some constructive budget work, I think, there, and some punishment that is geared towards reversing some of the actions they've taken. Certainly two actions that are the most concerning and most effective to our district are essentially a prohibition on steelhead fishing on West End rivers that is going to have little to no impact and is very unfortunate. And worse, they did it in a way that I think affects some people that, how they did it is they said you can't steelhead fish from a watercraft, and that unfairly and negatively affects people that are older, children, and people with disabilities. And it's very, very frustrating to us. And like I said, I can delve into the details if anybody wants, but it will essentially have no impact on the number of steelhead caught. And then they've also taken action against whale watching in an attempt to protect the orcas. Again, an unwise move and something that will actually potentially even hurt orcas more, because a lot of the whale watching vessels, we've already passed legislation that they have to stay far away from orcas, and they generally are out notifying the Navy and the Coast Guard and shipping traffic of where orcas and generally all whales are at, because that's their livelihood. They track them every day, and they're very good at finding them. And they provide some protection for the orcas, and a prohibition on whale watching is going to leave those orcas, in my mind, unprotected. That issue affects Port Townsend certainly a lot more than Port Angeles. Port Townsend has a pretty lively whale watching industry. And with that quick wrap up, I will start taking questions. I imagine people will have questions, and I'll be happy to answer those now.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I'm hearing an echo. So Rod, would you like to go first with the question?
I would. I'm in my car. As you may have read, the West End does not have power. The PUD has been working throughout the night on that issue. Thank God to those heroes out there doing that. Hoping to have it restored here shortly. I wanted to follow up on the fish and wildlife discussion, and specifically on the issue of impacts to the business community. As you're aware, and you've been a true advocate and hero for this one that came at us right before Christmas, the impacts could be upwards of $1 million to just our West End business community here in the December, January, February time period. So in addition to addressing some pretty poor, if not inappropriate processes, what else do you see as a way to help the business community there?
What else we can do to help that? I think the best thing we could do is to get this changed. What happened, and what Rod's talking about, is the department over the last couple of years has hinted that the steelhead on the West End rivers have some stress and have some problems. But they pretty abruptly made this rule change without a lot of warning. So Steelhead charter fishermen, hotels, and the like have taken a lot of reservation and a lot of deposits for people to come out and steelhead fish, because the Olympic Peninsula really is a champion and world-class steelhead fishing area. Now that they've made this rule change, a lot of those deposits, a lot of those reservations are having to be reverted. So I think as quickly as we can, getting this rule reversed would be most impactful positively to West End businesses.
Totally agree.
There is some potential we could get some money for impacted businesses on the West End. That might be a little more difficult, but it is certainly possible. And just real quickly on why this won't have an impact. We know roughly how many steelhead are in the rivers in the West End rivers, and the tribes have 50% of those steelhead. They're entitled to 50% of their steelhead. The difference between tribal and non-tribal is the tribal, with their steelhead, they actually harvest the fish. So when they catch a steelhead, they harvest it and either use it for their own purposes or sell it in Pike Place or whatever. The steelhead are very valuable a fish. For the non-tribal, which is sport and charter, it's only catch and release. So, and they have an extremely low mortality rate because they have rules like they can't use hooks and stuff like that. And so, and steelhead are very hard to catch. So this rule impinges just on the 50% that is non-tribal that is caught and released anyways, and they already have a low mortality rate. So by essentially creating rules that prohibit fishing for them is going to have little to no impact over the overall amount of steelhead that are going to remain in the West End rivers. That's where our frustration lies. If there was a real problem, I believe the tribes would also be taking methods to decrease how many fish they're catching, and there's no decrease there, which makes me think that it's probably not even a problem overall, because steelhead and salmon in general are very important, obviously, to the tribes.
So if I may add a follow-up question there, the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission will be in conjunction with NOAA and Department of Fish and Wildlife are creating the grant program for commercial fishing businesses. And Washington State has $50 million for grants for businesses in that category. And they have determined that their spending plan would not include businesses that are involved with freshwater commercial fishing. Is there anything that, and also they still haven't opened that funding, and yet that was funded back at the beginning of the CARES Act. And so is there anything that you can do to try to influence them to consider also freshwater fishing businesses to be able to apply for that relief?
So the stuff you're talking about is in federal waters, which generally don't, as far as fishing goes, generally don't include freshwater. There's potential, but I have huge frustration with the commercial fishing industry in the state, in that they're unwilling to really make any sacrifices around salmon and salmon preservation. There's a whole gillnet industry issue that we deal with on the Columbia River, which is enormously frustrating. I don't know how that's going to play out. We can certainly make an effort to do that, Colleen, but with my history with the Pacific Marine Group you mentioned and commercial fishing in general, I wouldn't hold out much hope.
Okay, thank you. I see Dale has a question. Dale, you want to take it?
Where did you go?
Sure. Hi, Kevin. How are you doing?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I've heard there's thoughts of legislation about limiting the Emergency Powers Act of the governor so that it limits the time before he can call the legislation. And I there's been a lot of abuses that's come out through this COVID. So I wondered, is there support for this kind of legislation, and would you support it?
I'll take your second question first. Generally, I will support it. I haven't got on and co-sponsored any of the bills yet. I need to look at those a little more closely. In general, I agree with you. I think during this pandemic, we would have been much better off had we done a special session. I think it would be wise for us to limit how long the governor can go using his executive powers without legislative oversight. But the first part of your question, is there general support for it? I think between some Republicans and moderates like myself, there is, but I think overwhelmingly Democrats from more urban areas have generally supported what the governor does. So I don't know if anything's going to actually be passed, but I do support many forms of what's been talked about. And like I said, I need to look at what's been introduced already and look at co-sponsoring some of that legislation, but I don't know if anything's going to actually make it to the finish line. And then, of course, the way our legislative process works is it goes through the whole legislative arena, which is very difficult to get through, and then it has to be signed into law by the governor, and he certainly has power to veto that. We can override vetoes, but then that takes 2/3 in each chamber, which again, something that would limit the governor's power. I'm not sure if we can even make it through the legislative process, let alone overriding his almost certain veto of that.
All right, thank you. Interesting. So yesterday, the governor released some information about a new reopening plan based on regions. And I know that Hospital Commissioner John Nutter is on with us and had a concern question about that. John?
Thank you, Colleen, and good morning, Senator. My question is, do you anticipate the legislature taking this issue up at all? Because when I look at the plan that was released yesterday, it's really not all that logical. It does things such as lump Clallam County in with Kitsap County. And I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. Say Jefferson County and Clallam County and Mason, we're going to put you all in with Kitsap County all together and then measure you all as one group. And then there's specific metrics
You're
that
right, sir.
such as hospitalizations. Well, in Mason County, Clallam County, and Jefferson County, each county had all of one hospitalization as of yesterday. And so all it takes is one or two people to completely throw that metric out of whack. So I understand kind of some of the big picture theory, but some of it, just from a practical perspective, doesn't make sense to me. And I'll close with, another one of the metrics was, ICU capacity. Well, obviously that's or ICU beds occupied. Obviously that's trying to measure capacity to accept more, but there's other methods other than ICU beds. At Olympic Medical Center, for example, we're ready to wall off half of our ER and stand up a COVID unit with 12 to 14 beds. So we have capacity. We only have one in the hospital, but if we're going to get lumped into Kitsap County and some of the things happening there, I don't know that this one-size-fits-all approach is really all that good.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thanks, John, for that question. And Colleen mentioned this at the beginning of the phone call. I knew he was coming out with a regionalization plan. I hadn't seen that he lumped us in, or his office lumped us in with Kitsap County. I agree, it is concerning. That's not something that legislatively we should overturn since it's an executive order. It's something that Mike, Steve, and I should work with the governor's office in getting a little reworked, because Kitsap's just so much more urban than we are. We get lumped with Kitsap for a lot of issues, and we get lumped with with Grace Harbor for other issues. Certainly our legislative district covers all of Clallam, Jefferson, and the upper half of Grace Harbor. I'm really interested that you mentioned Mason, because Clallam and Jefferson have done a good job in containing COVID. Grace Harbor actually started off slower as far as COVID cases than we did, but they've exploded in COVID cases. So we don't want to go in there and say Clallam, Jefferson, and Grace Harbor, because that also would be detrimental. But it's interesting you mentioned Mason. I hadn't thought a lot about Mason. I don't know who else is in Mason's region, but that's something we can maybe look at and just say, instead of arguing, look, we don't want to be in with Kitsap, just make us our own region. If we could offer, well, let's join another region that is more similar to us. There might be some benefits there. It might be easier to rework, but we'll certainly start working on that today and make that request. Like I said, Clallam and Jefferson have done excellent jobs in containing this pandemic. Thanks to your work, John, and others at the hospital and our public health areas. And the more secluded we can make ourselves, I think the better chance we have of getting reopened.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, and I'll leave you with one last comment, which is just a concern about the overall structure that the governor laid out. He's laid out a weekly analysis, which means that, being in phase 1 or phase 2 could change week to week. And if I'm a restaurant operator, which I have some in the port that I work for, why would you ever open up a restaurant if you're not going to know if you're going to be able to be open week to week? That creates a lot of uncertainty. Do you buy food and stock up your freezer or not? So number of challenges with the plan you laid out. So thank you for anything you can do.
Yes, and I'll tell you that once again, he took action based on just his conversations, I believe, with the Department of Health, and took no input from legislative leaders, took no input from business leaders, and this has happened numerous times during the pandemic. But again, we're presented with a plan and an idea that is just not going to work for most of rural Washington. I don't know if it works for the Puget Sound area, but again, it's just not going to work out here. And it's, again, very frustrating.
Okay, thank you. Priya from Clallam Mosaic had a question. Priya?
Yes. Hi, Senator. Thank you for doing this. I have a question with regards to the rollout of the vaccine. I would suspect that individuals with developmental disabilities would be people that would likely receive the vaccine early, would be one of the early groups to receive the vaccine. And these individuals are often not in the loop in many communications. So do you know anything about the communication plan in order to get the information out there that they're next on the list and should line up, essentially?
I don't know, but I can try to find out. Is there any indication that people with disabilities have been more negatively affected by COVID than the general population?
Yes, nationally there is a lot of data that's emerged showing that individuals with disabilities who often have tremendous underlying conditions have had significantly more severe forms of the disease, yes.
Okay, I'll check into it. Thanks, Priya, for bringing that up.
Can I just ask one other question related to people with disabilities? So in the federal relief package that was passed in the original CARES Act and as well in the new one, there is a leave out of people who are adults who are dependents of families in terms of getting a relief check. And so people with disabilities who live at home with their families get left out of getting a relief check. So I wondered if the state was aware of that gap for people with disabilities and whether there was any impetus to move forward with addressing that gap at the state level.
I've heard nothing at the state level. We are going to do some degree of our own relief plan. I think it'll be generally centered on relief for businesses and those that are most impacted by the pandemic. But I will talk with Derek Kilmer about that. I was unaware that adult dependents that are people with disabilities do not get a relief check. So I'll pass that on to Kilmer for sure.
Okay, thank you so much.
So I have a question, Senator Vandeweghe. I understand that today at noon, the state health department is going to announce the 4-tier 1B vaccination plan. And there's been a lot of discussion about school teachers being a prioritized category. But what has not been included is childcare workers. And it seems logical to think that child care providers have even more interaction with the children from a social distancing standpoint, and certainly have that same kind of vulnerability due to that, and are really critical for our economy. And so I'm wondering if that's something, if it doesn't come out today, and that's something that you could do, voice your opinion on and try to influence.
Certainly can. I agree with you. I mean, if childcare workers should be lumped in with teachers and other folks that work in education. I'll track that.
So, and I see Brian Koo put in the chat box a map to the regions for the governor's plan.
Oh, good.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone else have questions? I see Randy Johnson. Commissioner Johnson is on with us. Commissioner Johnson, do you have anything?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Senator. You talked a little bit about childcare, which, as Colleen had stated, and as all business owners know, is really critical for as we move our economy forward. Exactly what is the state thinking about when you, in light of how they might fund it or where they're going? And I say that recognizing, of course, I'm on the board of the YMCA, and we certainly provide childcare. I can tell you we've all had all of our trials and tribulations as we've gone up and down, and it's of course a very necessary function. But and the B part of that is the county is working together with Boys and Girls Club, the pool district, other privates, as well as the Y, to think about childcare in a kind of collaborative basis, which absolutely makes sense. But I'm just curious as to what the state's thinking about, or what you're thinking, or where they're going with that.
So what's been proposed with this potential capital gains tax is for the state to invest more in childcare. Our district, fortunately, much to the thanks of Steve Theringer, has already seen a lot of some of what that potentially could be. Some of that certainly is the infrastructure side. So the state funded a child care center in Elma. We've helped the William Shore Pool, which is going to have childcare. We've helped the YMCA, which is going to have childcare. We've helped the Port Angeles Boys and Girls Club, which is going to childcare. So there's certainly the infrastructure part that if there was a capital gains tax, the rest of the state would see more of that potential for infrastructure for places that provide childcare. And then there would be the more the operation side where business owners and other folks could be eligible for some relief in funding childcare and helping it in that regard, because childcare gets very expensive really quickly and can be a detriment to a wage earner or a business owner. Delving into this a little bit deeper, there are also a lot of, and Commissioner Johnson, I know you're well aware of these, there's a lot of regulations we've put around childcare over the last decade, many of which are not working out the way I think they were intended or hoped to be worked out. And they, in essence, make it really difficult in many regards for people to provide childcare, which is just forcing people to underground, to have your neighbors watch your kid or whatever, which is kind of where we wanted to get away from. So in my mind, if something does happen, I want to see some relaxing or changing of the regulations around childcare, and try to make it a little more workable for people as well.
Okay, thank you. Pat McCauley had a question. Pat?
Well,
Oh. Here, I'm trying to unmute her. Let's see. There we go. Go ahead, Pat.
thank you. I think we collided, Colleen. I unmuted myself as you tried to unmute me. 2 sessions ago, I requested as a company that's entire workforce is remote, that maybe you could look into reducing L&I for remote workers, since if someone trips in their pajamas at home, I'm not paying an L&I claim for it. And also as an encouragement to get more family wage jobs to move to depressed areas. And you did follow through with that. I appreciate it very much. But I think that as more and more people move remote permanently, that it's an opportunity for us, like you said. And also, again, this is something to look into. There's no reason I should pay the same as someone who goes into an office building and sits behind a computer all day. So I hope that the change here is going to be semi-permanent for a lot of businesses as they see the advantages to employees from working from home. And I just did a study where for an employee, it's an advantage of about $10,000 a year in benefits from working from home. So employees are going to resist going back if they can, and employers benefit from it. There's a downside, as commercial real estate is going to have a huge hiccup, but I am hoping that you'll look into this to benefit all those people who have remote workers that want to keep them that way permanently. And we'll hopefully gain some decent family wage jobs in our county. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. Good point. And we'll work to revisit that. That is something I worked on a couple of years ago. So yeah, we'll revisit that as we look at this whole post-pandemic, rural broadband, people working more from home and in rural areas issues. So thanks for the reminder there.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Angie from Squim Chamber had a question.
Hi. So I the last few days and weeks, I've felt a little bit like what I imagine a hostage negotiator feels like, with businesses who are on the brink of collapsing and starting to buck the public health measures, saying, I'm just going to open. And I just wonder, I know that this is a multi-tiered, multi-tiered authority, but is there something that we can share with our local businesses to get them through this? It's a primal thing. They're losing their livelihood. They're not going to be able to, keep their homes, and, they have all got these issues, and I just feel like I bleed for them, and I just don't know what to tell them. So what would you help us with those businesses that are on the brink?
Yeah, and I hear you very much, and I understand where you're coming from. The main thing I'll tell them is more relief is on the way, and I think the state legislature, anyways, knows what position they're in, and we're going to get as much relief to them as soon as we can. I know unemployment insurance has been on a lot of people's mind. We're going to have relief before this bill they'll have their first bill due April 30th. We should have legislation that will decrease that amount substantially, passed into law before then. There's a lot of talk about, as I kind of mentioned, a state relief plan that'll be targeted at many of the businesses you just mentioned. So my message there would be more relief is on the way. Our 2 counties have done very well in controlling this pandemic, and people are being vaccinated, and hopefully life will return to normal within a few months.
Okay, thank you. So later on today, we have a NOLA meeting. That's the North Olympic Legislative Alliance. That's Clallam and Jefferson counties, business leaders, and government leaders and some nonprofits. And I know that we've done a survey on what the top, we're trying to get to the top 3, but the top 4 have been broadband issues, financial relief for businesses, the Marine Economic Opportunity Bill that Representative Chapman is sponsoring, and then also childcare. But so what, everybody wants to have better broadband, but I mean, we need to pinpoint, what does that mean? And I know there's a House bill that was pre-filed that gives local governments the authority to provide broadband services, even as I understand it, retail services to people throughout, not just their districts, but beyond if they so choose to do that. Have you weighed in, or do you have a position on how we should resolve the broadband issues across our rural regions?
Well, on the specific example you just cited, I've always been a fan of local governments being able to provide retail broadband. We should have, decades ago, we should have outlaid broadband the same way we did electricity back in the 20s and 30s, and that and maintaining that if you're a for-profit company and you want to provide broadband in urban, easy, rich areas, you also have to provide the same broadband in rural, less profit margin areas, and we didn't. Governments didn't, both federal and state governments didn't. But we did that with electricity, and if we hadn't done that with electricity, rural areas wouldn't have had electricity for decades after places like Seattle and Tacoma did. So I've always been a fan of local governments being able to provide broadband. We passed legislation a few years ago that allowed PUDs to do that, and I would have no problem with PUDs competing with for-profit companies to provide broadband. I think it would have some impact here, but it's not going to get us everywhere where we need to go. To get fully everywhere we need to go to areas like the West End, which are pretty rural. It's gonna be a multifaceted effect, and it's gonna require some federal and state funding, hopefully some private-public partnerships to make happen.
Okay, thank you. Jim McIntyre has a question. Jim?
See if I can unmute myself here. Good morning, Senator. Hope you're doing well in this new year, and I'm glad we've got 2020 behind us, as we all are, I'm sure. This is going to be a session that's going to be really weird, I think, in that it'll be socially distanced and all of those things that I'm not sure that I fully understand how the Senate and how the House is going to conduct their business. Being that that's true, are there things that, and I would, if Mike and if Steve were here on the call, I would be asking them the same question or making perhaps the same comment. Are there things that the three of you can do to communicate directly with NOLA or your constituents at large to inform us about what things are going to be coming up so that we can weigh in with an opinion to you or to the appropriate committees? I know that the committee schedules are put out as they usually are, but there's going to be a lot more, what's the right way to say this? There's going to be a lot more friction in the process, in that there's going to be fewer bills that can be addressed, and the things that are addressed are going to be something that we really should pay attention to, given the difficulty with an economic reopening, with the governor's regionalization plan, as we've seen. We don't know yet how quickly the vaccines are going to be rolled out. We hope it's going to be quick, but the things that the legislature can do to address those things is likely to move a little slower than what we might have been accustomed to in the past. And I'm just speculating here. But anyway, transparency and communication from the legislature to the business community in particular that I'm interested in is going to be something that's vital. Are there things that you have been thinking of or could think of to communicate more directly with your constituents here?
Well, that's a good question, Jim. I actually think that the way the session's going to lay it out, communication will actually be better. And the legislature has always been very transactional and open anyways, but I think it'll be even more so virtually. I mean, everything we do is going to be online essentially, and anybody can tune in anytime they want. And I get that you don't have time or the desire to tune in all the time. So we'll do the things we've traditionally done, where we have town halls, which have been very popular. The virtual town halls, or the telephone town halls is what we call them. We've done those for years. We'll do those again. We'll probably even do more than one. I think we're already maybe even have one scheduled around the middle of February or the middle of March. So we'll do those certainly, and then just everything we've TVW has already up to their capacity. So at times previously, pre-pandemic, there were times where there might be a committee hearing or some legislative stuff going on that didn't get on TVW, and that won't be the case anymore. Everything will be, and a lot of people only have the TVW channel if they have cable, but everybody that has internet can watch everything on TVW. So if anything, we're going to be more open than we have in the past. I saw Josh Weiss on the call earlier. I know you guys have a lobbyist, and he obviously will be very beneficial in keeping you up to date on what's going on. And you're certainly free to call any one of us or our offices. I think you have probably all of our cell phone numbers, and you can call us anytime and ask about an issue you're hearing about. I mean, sometimes, oftentimes actually, we're dealing with stuff, or I'm voting on something where I didn't know, that anybody in the district was impacted or interested in it. So if you ever hear anything, certainly just reach out to us and give us a call. We're happy to answer or talk to you about it.
Great, thank you. Brian Koo has a question about the unemployment trust fund. Brian?
Yeah, sorry about that. Found my mute. Hey, Kevin, thanks for being here and for everything you're doing. Hope the garage sale went well. Just looking at how the unemployment trust fund avenues for that to be replenished or funding that again. You mentioned earlier what has businesses up at night is obviously elevated rates from having to utilize that during the COVID pandemic. Can you expand on how you see that potentially being addressed?
The way I potentially see that being addressed is that we lower the expected rates and smooth it out over a longer time, which will be fine as long as we don't have a recession or a repeat in a pandemic, and it'll work fine. We have a very, very robust unemployment insurance system in this state. But if it's not fine, we have another tool that the state, as far as I know, has never used, in that we can get zero interest money from the feds, a loan that we have to pay back, that we can also use to fund our unemployment insurance. during the Great Recession, I believe half the states, 25 out of 50 states, used those loans. We were not one of them. And it was also my understanding that as far as like fall of 2020, California still hadn't paid back their Great Recession loans from the feds, and they were obviously having to get more money to deal with the relief needed during this pandemic. So Washington is in a much better place than most states as far as unemployment insurance, and I favor smoothing that payback over a longer period of time, not increasing rates substantially, and hoping that works. And as a stopgap, using federal loans. Some legislators have proposed raising taxes or using other general fund monies to put into UI. I don't think that's fiscally the best use of that money. I think bringing relief to businesses and getting us reopened as soon as possible is a better use of that money. Because the UI system works well as a standalone, and I don't think we need to be meshing money around.
Great, thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions? Oh, I know we had someone on the phone that said they wanted to be able to ask a question. That was Wege. Wege?
Hi, Colleen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I just want to thank you, Rod, and Senator Vandeweghe for just continuing to advocate for us in regards to the fishing regulation changes. This is coming on top of COVID and will continue to be on top of changes and concerns we're going to have to deal with COVID. But it's just such a big issue for our businesses in our area. Senator Vandeweghe, I want to thank you. I appreciate everything you've done for us thus far. We're also feeling hopeful that we might be able to impact the rule changes for this year and that they may be possibly modified. Is there any suggestions or anything else we can be doing to help kind of move in that direction?
Wege, you guys have been doing a very good job, and you are organized, and I appreciate and thank your work on in this arena. I think continuing to raise it to people's level of understanding is important, and it's the best strategy right now. A lot of people don't know about this issue and how it's negatively affected an area like Forks that was already suffering, and really the tens of thousands of dollars in deposits that have been had to pay back with canceled reservations and the frustration that brings. And then also my frustration in just the way this rule is being played out. We've had the American Disabilities Act in place for 3 decades now, and this is a clear infringement on that. The department will obviously lose a lawsuit when it gets to that point, and that to me is just unfair and extremely frustrating. So I think continuing to communicate with as many people as you can, particularly the governor's office and the Fish and Wildlife Commission, is the best place to put your energy.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe, let's see, does anybody else have any questions for Senator Vandeweghe at this point?
Were you going to call on me?
Go ahead.
Senator, I was just wondering what, if anything, might be done in the session about affordable housing.
Affordable housing is something always on people's minds. Our chair in that arena is a lady named Patty Kruder, who's from Bellevue and is very passionate about it. I don't know what is, and I apologize, I don't know what's going to be proposed as far as affordable housing. I know they're spending a lot of their energy right now on the moratorium on evictions, rent relief for landlords and the like. As far as affordable housing directly, I apologize. I don't know what's going to be presented. They'll probably have something, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I think that other part, the rent relief is great, but the landlords have bills too, so that's
right. And by rent relief, I mean money going to landlords to make up for their loss. Yeah,
that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Of course, in the last federal bill that was recently passed at the end of last year, there was billions for rent relief in that will be filtered to the state, but I'm not sure when that will occur. So, and Senator Vandeweghe, have you heard anything from the SBA as to whether they will be, when they will be rolling out the new EIDL advances, which are grants, and then also the PPP loans? And will we be identified as, in Clallam County, as a low-income community, which gives more of a priority to businesses in those regions?
For your first question, I have not heard. And for the second part, I would be surprised if we were not.
Okay. So it looks like we have a question. It's probably from Andy Salee. The Sequim Valley Airport, along with a lot of small state and privately owned public use airports, were left out of the first stimulus bill last year for funding, and a lot of well-funded airports received a lot of money. They didn't really need it for port projects. The airports that were left out needed the money most. Is that something you would support funding in the next legislative session? I know there's a CARB program, Community Airport. John Nutter, help me out what that stands for. Revitalization Board, maybe, or Karen, do you know?
Community Aviation Revitalization Board.
I was close. Got a couple of those words right.
I'm sure I would support that. That makes sense. I can guess on what airports got funding. But yes, of course I would support that. I'm not that familiar with the area, obviously, but I would support that, and we'll make a note and check into it for sure.
Okay. So let's see. We're rolling up on 9 o'clock, and so if there aren't any last-minute questions, I do see one left in the chat. And so if anybody has anything, they can go ahead and chime in right now. Going once, going twice. So I didn't hear anything. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We're really honored to have Senator Vandeweghe's time this morning. And if you have any follow-up questions, please, you can send those to me at cmcaleer@clallam.org. And also we will have the link to this recording up on our website, chooseclallamfirst.com, and under Coffee with Colleen. So thanks so much for joining, everyone, and enjoy your week.
Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year.